Have you ever seen a man take a shovel to dig a huge pig-sized grave, to then stumble and fall into it himself head first? I have. Who knew that this man had better digging skills than a 2-ton caterpillar digger? Wow! Imagine what that interview would have been like if it wasn't a staged setup, with certain questions being well and truly off the table, even though Her Majesty's very controlled personal propaganda machine want us to think that the questions were not vetted by the Royal Freak Show Circus beforehand. Yeah, sure. The man pig who claims he cannot sweat, due to a very rare condition that he suddenly made up on the telly, seems to have found a miracle cure for his perspiring disabilities. Amazing. That's because he is certainly feeling the sweat now, while also leaking from his very nervous exit stage southern border, without any warning. Nasty business. What a mess. Oh, and of course, how rude of any of us to suggest that Randy Andy was some kind of party prince. We must have been out of our minds to make up such ridiculous, untruthful, unfounded, very gossipy, fabricated tales. Oh dear, this is awkward. Now, I could go on and on about this car crash of an interview by the self-driving car that landed in what was supposed to be a very cushioned ditch, but I thought that I would allow the rest of the world to do all of that, as today I wanted to remind everyone of how his brother, the descendant of Vladimir the Impaler, and heir to the English crown, Prince Charles, got caught up in some very similar stories not so long ago. Patterns, oh how they love to weave their very confusing, distorted, rather fuzzy, unwearable patterns. So, let us take a trip down the royally depraved memory lane. Have you ever heard of a creature they called Peter Ball? Whom was a bishop for the Luciferian worshipping Church of England. Ball, whom was accused of gross indecency against a 17-year-old boy back in 1992, and instantly was surrounded by a team of defenders, which included other top abusing clergy, cabinet ministers, a high court judge, public school headmasters, as well as magistrates, who all came forward in his support to lobby the corrupt, unlawful people in fancy dress, otherwise known as the Police and Crown Prosecution Service. And of course, not forgetting a lovely letter sent personally by a certain royal prince. Oh yeah, and even after Ball was publicly disgraced, as well as an independent inquiry finding that Ball had colluded with other clergy over a 20-year period, abusing young boys and young men, was offered and accepted a lovely little cottage on the Prince's Duchy of Cornwall's estate. How nice. To then continue to enjoy a very close relationship with the descendant of Vladimir the Impaler, and was even invited to read a homily at the Prince's father-in-law's funeral back in 2006. Ball never faced any charges at that time, but did receive a police caution. The Bishop Ball was allowed to continue visiting public schools after he was accused. That was until the year of 2007. And then in the year of 2012, the Bishop Ball was finally convicted for multiple and serious sexual abuse. Now, as if all that wasn't enough to strike the alarm bells in the minds of the ignorant, brainwashed, tax slave mass, here on these gloomy pedo islands, we must never forget who was the descendant of Vladimir the Impaler's best friend. Which of course was the BBC's all-time favorite presenter, whom they loved so much that they took the risk of covering up all of his crimes, which allowed him to continue on with his depraved psychotic behavior. None other than the child rapist and murderer, Jimmy Savile. Now ask yourself, is it just by mere coincidence that two brothers, who were given birth by that notorious queen of all motherfudging gangsters, end up being involved with, and close friends of, two of the most prolific child abusers the world has ever seen? What are the chances of that? Are we to put this down to a lot of bad luck, or how about royal naivety, or even a really bad judgment of characters. Because we are told in both cases that the royal princes knew nothing about the depraved carnal preferences of these men. Strange, isn't it, how both of these royal idiots knew nothing about any of it, but yet have the world's most pervasive secret services agencies, who are experts in keeping tabs on all of us, but yet had no clue about Jimmy Savile and Jeffrey Epstein. Yeah, funny that. Indeed, Savile admitted himself that, if Her Majesty hadn't honored him when she did, things might have not turned out so well for him, but she did, which of course made the disgusting beast untouchable. Do you see how that works? These royal cover-ups go back a very long way. In fact, I could do an hour show on just how many times they have woven these very same patterns. Such as that time when the Conservative MP, Geoffrey Dickens, compiled a very lengthy dossier in the 80s, who Dickens declared would blow the lid off the disgusting habits of the most powerful and famous child abusers. In fact, back in 1981, Dickens did indeed name the former British High Commissioner to Canada, Sir Peter Hayman, as a depraved paedophile in the House of Commons, and luckily for him, was given parliamentary privilege, which meant he couldn't be sued for slander. You see, back in 1978, Peter Hayman left a package of paedophile material on a London bus, and when the police traced the package to him, they then found his diaries which described sexual acts with children. But, as usual, Peter Hayman was never charged. Before he died in '95, Dickens said he had received many death threats, threatening calls and many burglaries at his London home. And of course, as we all know, more recently, that goofy gangly hag, Theresa May, acting as the so-called Secretary of State, covered a whole host of pedophilic crimes by high establishment figures, with important files lost, or more like, destroyed as they found them, and all the rest. The Dickens dossier was one of these important files to have suddenly gone missing, which had information about former Prime Minister Ted Heath, the Liberal MP Cyril Smith, as well as the Queen's art historian and two-faced double agent spy, Sir Anthony Blunt, which I covered last week. If you haven't seen that particular video, I urge you to go and watch it after this. It's quite the eye-opener. Savile, who once described himself as the royal court's jester, also said that other people didn't know how to handle the royal family and that he had a very unique approach, which, as he claimed, the fake-named Windsors seemed to like. Prince Charles and Savile had been very close friends going back to the early 1970s, with both of them using children's charities to hoodwink the population into thinking they were generous with their time. But, as we now know, the use of children's charities was used as a gateway for Savile to get closer to the children. Indeed, Jimmy Savile actually moved into children's homes and hospitals, and was given clearance by Her Majesty's controlled government in order for him to do so. And much like Jeffrey Epstein, Jimmy Savile was a procurer, the supplier of children to any high-ranked members of the royal establishment, with a taste for pedophilic carnal desires. In fact, one could easily make the claim that Jimmy Savile and Jeffrey Epstein were indeed cut from the same cloth.